Bob says, yeah, we got home, and Friday night when we woke up, or as we were going to bed, Karen poked me and said, I think we ought to pay tithe tomorrow. Tithe? Are you crazy? And he said, I gave her a big long lecture, and I said I was never going back to that church again, and I would... And Karen said, well, I don't need to live here. All right, I'll pay tithe. And so the next morning at church, right down there on row 2, the offering plate was passed, and Bob, who is one of the world's most wonderful, unique characters, stood up, looked up at God, dropped a dollar bill in the offering plate, and said, all right, God, do your thing. Made for a unique church service. You imagine? Have you ever stood up and told God to do his thing when you give him his tithe? Bless me. I'm ready. Well, next Friday night, Bob and Karen look at each other. So how are we doing this? God hasn't done anything. Why should I pay tithe again? We're not making that much money. Maybe he just doesn't do it the first time. Maybe it takes 2 or 3 weeks before he gets in gear. Maybe you're not on the list yet. And so this time, Bob puts the money in and stays seated. 3rd week. 4th week. I ain't going. God doesn't come through. And Karen looked at him and said, Bob, I think maybe you ought to pay tithe on your little side business. Ha! But he does. Puts $5 in. The business doubles. Next week he puts $10 in. Business doubles. Next week he puts $20 in. Business. 3 months later, Bob was one of the top 3 marijuana dealers in San Diego County. So when Bob and Karen told me this story, I laughed. I laughed so hard they thought I was sick. And then I finally said, you got to be serious. This is right. Who was eating all the marijuana, or what was going on here? Were the angels all smoked up? And Bob says, I have no idea. But man, did we sell a lot of weed. I said, what'd you do then? So one night in bed, Karen looked at me and said, Bob, I think you got to quit we got to get out of this stuff. We're not in the right crowd. We got to change our lives completely so we can really be God's kids. Yeah, but that makes a... So they called the pastor. And they said, Pastor, yeah, Bob and Karen, we have a request for you. 2 requests. What's that? Would you marry us? Yeah, I'd be glad to. Would you baptize us? I'd love to. And then would you please help us go someplace far away from San Diego where we can start all over as God's kids instead of as the devil's kids smoking dope? I'd love to. And 3 weeks later, Bob and Karen, no longer even owning motorcycles, were married, baptized in the Seventh-day Adventist Church in Broadway Street in San Diego, California. And they drove their new little Volkswagen away to the new home, the new place where they were going to live as God's kids.